Your brand may be staying on top of current trends, but are you agile enough to stay relevant, resilient, and successful as customers, competition, and the world continues to change at a breakneck pace? I'm thrilled to share the newly revised version of my first book, The Agile Brand. I'm calling it The Agile Brand Revisited. It's been updated to reflect our continually changing world, and it provides 7 principles that form the backbone of an agile brand, offering detailed insights and actionable steps for incorporating them into your business strategy. This is the book that started it all, and I'm excited to share it with you. It's now available in print and digital formats and available everywhere. Learn more by going to the Agile Brand Guide website at www.agilebrandguide.com. Welcome to Season 4 of The Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom, where we discuss business agility through customer experience, employee experience, and digital transformation. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed on this show, you can go to my website at gregkihlstrom.com and read my latest articles or get a copy of my latest book, Meaningful Measurement of the Customer Experience, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kihlstrom, and I'm the host of the Agile Brand podcast. Today, we're going to talk about building a strong culture that thrives in a remote work environment. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Tim Brackney, President and COO of RGP, a global consulting firm that helps Fortune 1000 companies fill skills gaps through its workforce of 5,000 professionals. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Greg. It's great to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to talking about this topic with you. But first, why don't we start by you giving a little background on yourself as well as your role at RGP?
Sure. Yeah, so I've been in professional services my whole career. I started out with a large consulting firm and then migrated to RGP almost 20 years ago. And I would say that the fact that I've been here this long says a lot about the company's culture, which I know is the topic that we're going to talk about. But it also talks about some of the progress that we made as a company. So I'm very proud of that. My role currently is I run all of our go-to-market functions for the company. So we do business in North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. And I'm responsible for the sales, talent, and delivery pieces of our organization.
That's great. Well, let's get going here then. So RGP incorporated a hybrid work model prior to the pandemic and has long embraced a human-first approach to attracting and retaining accounting and finance professionals and helping organizations find talent that matches their rapidly changing needs. As we progress towards a post-pandemic world, let's explore how to build a strong company culture that thrives in companies where hybrid and remote work will remain prevalent. So let's start with a definition. What defines a good company culture from your perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. A company culture is kind of the soul of the company. It's a defined way that people behave in an organization, and it's like a patchwork quilt of shared beliefs and values. So for us, and I think in any culture, I think there are a few things that I think make a real good company culture. One is really clarity and transparency. They're similar words, but different words. Clarity meaning that everybody's sort of beating to the same drumbeat. They kind of know what the purpose of the company is and what our mission is every day. And then transparency to know kind of how we are matched against the purpose that we've stated for our company. So I think those two things, there's obviously a number of other things, but for me, those two things really, really help, particularly in a world where you're working both on-site and remote.
Yeah. I really like that clarity and transparency. That's great. So how has remote work made this challenging for some organizations? And is there a common thread you've seen in companies that have managed to succeed in spite of the challenges that this, pandemic posed to the work environment?
Yeah, I think we were all, especially in the world when everybody was remote, it was really a clarifying moment. It was kind of that moment where you kind of hold the mirror up to yourselves and said, kind of who are we as a company? Can we make this migration when we don't have when our norms have been interrupted? And I think one of the common threads that I've seen in companies that have managed to succeed, and I count us in that, is one, having built a sense of community, and that community extends beyond just the things that you're doing every day to succeed at your job. It's being connected to each other in a way that allows trust. And so that if you have that level of trust, the medium or modality that you actually go about to do your work doesn't impede it as much as it might be if you don't have that sort of clarity of purpose and you don't have that sort of foundation of trust. And so I think that in particular, coupled with leadership demonstrating empathy during change, are the things that have really worked for companies that have made this transition during the last 3 years or so.
Yeah. Well, and so one of the challenges that I know, several leaders have very publicly spoken about, and I think it's on the tops of many companies' minds when talking about moving to hybrid or even remote work, is just how it may affect the creativity and as well as the collaboration. So RGP has utilized hybrid and remote teams since, as I mentioned, well before the pandemic, and to great success. So what is the approach and mindset that's allowed you to achieve success in this area despite not being in that same physical location all the time?
Yeah, I think it's been a journey, right? So you started out where everybody was remote. There was this novelty of working in a world where you're looking at each other on screens, and I think that transformed to fatigue. And what you learn through that is that even companies with strong culture had to be much more intentional about the way that they interfaced with each other. And so I think that word intentional is really important, even as we move into a world that's more hybrid. It's thinking about the ways that you can make the atoms collide and doing it in a way that isn't just defined by meeting after meeting after meeting on teleconference. And so there were a number of things that people did to try to take advantage of these situations. And in some ways, there was an advantage to it because you could actually have intentional meetings with groups of people that would be difficult to have done in a purely on-site environment. So we're a company that has offices all over the world, and we found that there were ways to commune and have discussions around a particular topic that were now not bounded by being in the same room. And that really was really, really interesting. Still done by video conference, but there were groups that would get together that normally wouldn't have done that in our sort of normal course of work. And as we shifted now to more of a hybrid work, I use that word intentional again because we really we really want to get together, but we don't feel like we should have to get together. So we're intentional about the ways that we work together and when we come in and have to be together to try to work toward a common goal or solve a problem. But know that you retain that level of flexibility so that it's not all one or the other. In some ways, I think as most companies migrate to this, we're going to get the best of both worlds.
Yeah. Well, and so to kind of follow up on the let's say, official meetings or Zoom meetings or things like that, how do you foster the kind of culture where people do have, one of the things that was talked about when everybody moved remote or even hybrid is, people don't bump into each other at the coffee machine or the water cooler, so to speak. So, how do you enable and how do you foster those kinds of, less formal moments, I guess, that you described?
Yeah, I mean, I think at first maybe it was a little bit of a challenge, and people still kind of sort through this. But I'll just use the word opt-in. There's opt-in opportunities where I've seen leaders who said, "Look, for this particular day during the week, I'm going to be in the office working with a group of people. We're gonna bring lunch in, and we'd love it if other people could pop by and have an opportunity to meet people that maybe joined when we were all remote." And what we found, especially early on as the restrictions started lifting, is that those were really oversubscribed. People were really hungry to do that. And they used that as an opportunity to kind of just shift the workspace. They still might be doing actually a lot of teleconferences from the actual office. But then the water cooler discussions and the ability to meet in person and look somebody in the eye and to kind of cement that connection, people really, really were drawn to. And you kind of have to create experiences for people to get together and, like, to expand on that virtual water cooler that I was talking about when we were all remote. And there are a couple of things that we've done. I think one of those was, as an example, was we called it proof of fun, which was, hey, everybody, we're taking Friday off. The only thing that you have to do is get together with one or two people that you don't really know that well and in person, and send us a photo. And then we made that as part of a calendar that we put together so people could see that, could see that as a kind of touchstone of our culture. So I think those types of events are really important for a couple of things. One is to reinforce the culture and to allow some of this unintentional creativity to occur. But it's also fun, and fun is a big hallmark of our culture.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and so for those companies that let's say they're able to meet in person, but still, with the pandemic and hybrid work and remote work and everything, how have you seen companies create in-person contact that works well during the pandemic? Just with keeping in mind the sensitivities and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky thing because people are in charge of their own healthcare, and they have different things that drive them. And so I think it's really important as leaders, and we're sort of organized in a couple of different ways, but in local markets, to kind of take stock of people and understand kind of what will work for them or not. In the early days of the pandemic, we would do things where it was like, look, everybody's outside, and if you want to be masked, be masked. We're going to go on a hike, and use that as a way for us to be able to get together. And then for those that felt comfortable, we're going to buy you a coffee or a beer afterwards, type of a thing. And I actually felt that worked really well because people, again, opted into it and then felt like they were in an environment where they could still get the benefits of getting to know their coworker better or have a work discussion, but felt safe about it. And I think that opt-in mentality of providing spaces where large groups of people can feel comfortable and don't feel excluded, that those types of events are the types of events that I've seen be successful. I think where you have pockets of people who don't feel comfortable coming in, to create an environment where at least part of the festivities can be both virtual and in person. And we're starting to see more of that, people using technology with broader groups or using breakout groups that include people in a room, but also virtually, is a way to kind of cross that chasm.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Well, let's switch gears a little bit here and just talk specifically about leadership's role in leading teams towards post-pandemic growth and a strong culture. So, what are some of the essential soft skills that you think every good leader needs in today's environment? And, whether those are things they always needed or maybe even particularly things that are needed more than ever.
I mean, I feel in some ways this word maybe has been overused a little bit through the course of the pandemic, but I think it's so important to talk about empathy. And by empathy, I mean being aware of the environment and being able to put yourself in the shoes of other folks, and so that you can interface with them in a way that doesn't exclude them. And I think with all the things that we've gone through in the last 3 years, if as a leader, if you're not an empathic leader, you're going to have a real difficulty. Not just because the world is hybrid now, and you've got groups of folks who want to work in a different way. I mean, that if you're not an empathic leader, I think that would be difficult. But also just because generationally the workforce is changing, and you have to be really attuned to the wants and needs of new generations that are entering the workforce. And so that skill of really being savvy and really understanding, and then really reacting to the needs of your team is incredibly important. The second thing that I would add to that, and it kind of comes on if you're empathic or not, is your ability to communicate. And it's the ability to be able to give a broad-based message, but you might have to deliver it in different ways to different groups, even though you're delivering the same message. I liken it to like a pitcher that has different pitches, right? I mean, you don't use your fastball all the time. Occasionally, you're going to have to use the curveball, but it's still the same thing. You're still throwing it to try to get it across the plate to give a strike. And so, I think as a leader, I think in the past, the old paradigm of sort of being a command and control leader who showed up and ground it all out, like I think that paradigm is going to have a difficult, or that archetype is going to have will have a more of a difficult time in today's world, because you really have to take in a lot of information that's different than just pure business information and relate it to motivate and inspire your workforce.
Totally agree. And I think there's so many factors at play here. I mean, I think, those just entering the workforce that really entered during the pandemic. I mean, imagine that, from you're just starting work. You don't have the paradigm of the water cooler even to kind of go off of. So, there's that. I think, to follow on the empathy train there, I think an opportunity, because I like to find the good in even less than good situations. I think the opportunity for empathy with remote work and hybrid work because of the pandemic is, all of a sudden, if your kids are running in the back of the Zoom, or the cat falls in front of the laptop, or the dog runs in the background, it's like it's given us a window into people's lives where a year or two ago that might have seemed unprofessional in certain maybe RGP's been doing remote work for a while, so it's different in different places, but things like that were like business faux pas, so to speak. And now it's like everybody's kind of like, wow, we're all dealing with the same thing, whether it's lack of kids in school and childcare, or just stuff like that. Like we've all kind of opened up our lives a little bit, and I think that those that have thrived as much as possible in that environment are those, to your point, that have empathy and that are able to adapt and adopt, to the situation.
What you said is so spot on, and it just kind of strikes a chord. I remember in the really early days of the pandemic, I sent a note out to my team, and the note was basically, I had a picture of my kids and my cat. When you said the cat falling out, and I just said, I just want to introduce you to 3 new members of your team who you're going to see at various times bursting into our call. you know, and the idea is that this sort of, I think it's interesting, this blend of work and personal, like it actually humanized many people, but especially leadership. And so I think the ties that bind, if you had a strong culture, and you treated people with empathy during a time where everybody was dealing with something, like I see those relationships getting even stronger, and it's a very cool thing to see people in their real environment. And our environments now, there aren't as many borders between them. So
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I love that anecdote. I mean, of you sending that note out to everybody, because I think that's so great, because it gives everybody permission to kind of relax and like, okay, we're all living through this together. Like, let's, it's okay. Again, if your kid runs in the background in the middle of a meeting, like it happens, right? So I love that, and you setting an example as a leader doing that. What are some other ways that you can help? Whether it's things like that or just, build a sense of community and belonging in the workforce as a leader.
I think, I think it's an interesting thing. One is, I think the example I just gave you was, I think leaders don't have to be the strong, silent type anymore. They can be real and vulnerable, and, showing that side, so that people can understand kind of who you are as a real whole person is really important. I think, one of the things that we pivoted to in the beginning of the pandemic too was like we were in the process of sort of really redoing our onboarding and putting together what we were calling RGP University, which was opportunities to give people a real window into what RGP was, so that as they came into the company, they felt a part of that community, and then marrying the new folks with some of the groups that they would be coming into, and have creating forums where people could have real discussions, either individually or in groups. And like I found that as a leader and leveraging technology, I could actually talk to every new joiner in the company, even if it was for just 10 or 15 minutes. And that was something that I was limited by before. If I wasn't visiting their office, I didn't catch them when they joined or whatever. Now, literally every new person who comes into the company, I spend 10 or 15 minutes with them to understand their story and how they found us, and to thank them for joining RGP. So for for new joiners, to me, that is a way of having a direct connection and giving people a sense of, hey, thank you for joining our company. We're really excited to have you here, and having them connected directly into our culture right away. And then by kind of widening the net and including, a broader swath of people from around the company to do similar things, probably longer forums than 10 or 15 minutes, but like kind of plugging them into their, what will be their internal network right away. We found that to be really incredibly successful. And it's not hard. It's the things that you want to do. And some of the best moments of my day are when I'm spending 15 minutes with somebody who joined in our Manila practice, and I learned that this is the best onboarding and the most fun that they've ever had, and they're so excited to be at the company. It absolutely makes my day or my week.
No, that's so great. That's wonderful. Well, hey, one last question before we wrap up here. As leaders look ahead, and hopefully we're actually post-pandemic soon enough, but as they kind of navigate the months ahead, and often have to make some tough choices about whether it's hybrid, remote, or some permanent state of working methods. What's a piece of advice that you would have for them as they navigate those months ahead?
Contrary to my other answers, it's really a one-word answer, but then of course I'll expound on it. But it's to listen. It's listen. Your workforce is changing, and their attitudes are changing, and they are they're not rooted to you. You have to continue to demonstrate to them why they should be connected to your community, and that means that you'll have to be flexible in terms of kind of what you're willing to accept. And at the end of the day, especially for our company and a services company where our product is people, we have to listen to our people and understand what is the best environment that we can give for them to work and be involved in our community. And we have to recognize that that's not static. It's changing over time as our experiences change. And it's been this last 3 years, and especially these months post-pandemic, you see these things morphing pretty regularly. And so we have to be flexible. I think that's one of the most important things as leaders we can be.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Tim, thanks so much for joining. For those listening, what's the best way for them to keep up with you as well as what RGP is doing?
I think if you went to our website, www.rgp.com, you'll get a good lens into our business and our teams, and we update it regularly.
Great. Well, again, I'd like to thank Tim Brackney, President and COO of RGP, for joining the show. Thanks for listening to The Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom. Talk with you next week. Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.theagilebrand.show. To get a copy of my latest book, Meaningful Measurement of the Customer Experience, visit my website at gregkihlstrom.com. Until next week, stay agile.